Our Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says there's not enough money to pay government employees, raising concerns about the Department of Defence and Correctional Services. This as the public sector unions conclude a 3-year wage deal that will result in more than 1.3 million civil servants receiving an above-inflation pay hike of 5.5% in 2025-2026. Workers were looking to the Finance Minister for a pro-poor budget, but have slammed attempts to hike value-added tax by 2 percentage points, saying this would be devastating to workers. Dr. Kenneth Creamer, economist from the University of the Witwatersrand, joins us now. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Creamer. So as we get your reaction just on the impact of the decision to delay the budget yesterday, I mean, there's no doubt that Treasury now probably finds itself in a very difficult position, as it has a few weeks to crunch those numbers and find alternatives to a budget that is more palatable, I would say, for most of the time of a heavily constrained fiscal position.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. I think we should have no doubt in our minds that this is quite a serious crisis for our country. The budget is by far the most important public policy instrument that we have in our republic. And the fact that for the first time ever it was not passed in the manner that happened yesterday is very concerning. As you say, in the next few days, the Treasury is going to have to rework the budget and come back to the government, to the cabinet, the GNU parties, and give them the choices, as the minister put it, let them make the decisions if they do not accept his choices. If they don't want higher taxes, then which expenditure items will they choose to cut in order for us to keep a balanced budget going forward? That's in the next few weeks, but I'm also very worried about the longer run effect of this, the rejection of the budget. It calls into question a very important, credible, transparent process that we've had since the Mandela days of the 1994. We've won quite a number of awards internationally for the budget process that South Africa has adopted. And there's a risk now that it'll become subject to like last-minute changes, political horse trading. And I suppose it's the first time that GNU, rather than one party, has tried to do this. But I really hope this does not become the norm, where the budget becomes politicized and we cause uncertainty like this.
I'm sorry to rush into almost like a solution mode, but just talk to us about how South Africa can come out of these economic problems whilst coming out of the dangers of a debt trap in light of some of the recent comments that we've been hearing.
Yes, you have to ask your question, why would the Minister Godongwana suggest a VAT increase?
Yeah.
It's quite an extreme thing to do. And the reason would be that the budget is very constrained. We've had low growth for the last 10 plus years. When you have low growth, that means there's less money to go around, lower revenues coming in, and expenditure pressures have been building. There's been the COVID pressures, there's been the social grant pressures, there's been the state-owned company pressures. So the solution that he suggested, which has been rejected, is that he could raise 58 billion odd by increasing VAT. And obviously that would have to be paid by consumers. It's a wide tax. It's hard for people to avoid, except if you are zero rated. So that would have been his solution. I think now the problem is that if that is not the chosen solution, we are going to have to say, well, what can we do in this context? It was quite sobering, I think, because the document was released and many NGOs, many organizations in the education space, in the early learner space, thought they were going to get money now, based on the budget. Whether there'll be social grant increases based on that budget, whether those will be able to survive now, given the fact that there will not be as much money to go around, is going to be quite interesting to see.
And I mean, just given the introduction that we read just now before this interview, we're looking at government saying that it simply has not enough money for government employees, raising concerns again about, the departments of Defence, Correctional Services. Then there's obviously education and health. So shouldn't our focus then be on trying to grow the economy?
Correct. We need to grow the economy, but we've been trying to grow the economy for quite some time now. In the early 2000s, before the financial crisis, South Africa's economy would frequently grow by more than 3% per year, sometimes close to 5% per year. But since 2008, 2009, when there was a financial crash and the global commodity cycle fell, and we had the mistakes of the state capture era, we have found it very, very difficult to lift our economic growth rate again. So no finance minister worth his salt will say, well, I'm going to bet on growth, and therefore I don't need to raise taxes. I think that he decided that it was safer to say, well, let's raise the taxes and do everything we can. And if the growth does come, then that will help us to have more resources available. To be really clear, the growth package is not only about getting Eskom working, getting Transnet working, creating a positive investor environment, but a credible, sustainable budget is part of that growth process. So we are, in fact, risking that growth process if we compromise our budget.
And very quickly, Dr. Creamer, as we wrap up our conversation, just given that our country is now in the thick of a coalition government at national level, there is concern that due to a lack of poor political management and probably even approval measures, we might find ourselves in a situation where much needed certainty is hard to attain, just given this one example. I mean, do you think that South Africa then will be able to successfully navigate this budget crisis, as you called it?
I'm hoping that in the next few weeks, as the government works towards a budget that is acceptable to the GNU parties, that they can also at the same time discuss how this does never happen again. Something has gone wrong, that at the very last minute, when everything is printed and everyone is sitting to hear the budget from South Africa and around the world, that the budget has to be withdrawn. We need to have a much clearer political process of consultation, technically driven, not overly politicized, where the leaders of our country in civil society and particularly in government, the political leaders, can agree that this is what is the technical situation. Economists talk about a problem of a fiscal deficit bias. So there's a bias towards a deficit in the economic literature because politicians obviously prefer to spend and don't prefer to tax. It's hard to sell politically. So we need to say we will not allow the fiscal deficit bias to begin to dominate our processes.